All right, let's continue with the story now, in fact, and bring in Dr. Oscar van Heerden. He is a senior research fellow for African diplomacy and leadership at the University of Johannesburg. And perhaps we can pick that issue up with you this afternoon, Dr. van Heerden. Perhaps not unusual for an incoming president to rescind executive orders from their predecessor, but Trump has done so with 78 of them. But it's really what it does for racial equity and for gender rights, some of these orders that he's rescinded, what it does for those issues in the US.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's not unusual, as you say, but, the thing that we need to be wary about is just the speed with which these executive orders are actually being signed. It does suggest that the team around Donald Trump has been at it for weeks, preparing these executive orders. Remember, it's not just a piece of paper. It has to comply with domestic law. It has to comply with international law, if indeed it is about international organizations and so forth. So a lot of work has been going on whilst we were getting ready for this inauguration. And on the first day of his office, to sign this amount of executive orders, it's unprecedented.
Let's get into that issue around, I'm just trying to find, recognizing, creating a policy that recognizes only two genders. So the new president, signing an order to remove so-called gender ideology guidance from federal government communication policies. Essentially, the order makes it official policy that there are only two genders, male and female.
Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to come to a point where a matter as simple as this has to be legislated in this particular draconian fashion. I think that speaks volumes about the gender revolution that has erupted within the United States over the last few years. People have really been torn. You would recall, Iman, that the far very religious, let me rather say, the very religious segments of society within the United States have always had very serious issues around this issue of gender and the gender revolution. And it has been a discussion and debate in so many circles. So I think Trump is attempting to say that this is an end to this issue, whether it relates to schools, whether it relates to sports, and so on and so forth. But as to whether he is going to succeed, because I'm sure that there's a number of things that right groups, NGOs, civil society groups, and so on, is going to challenge and take the matter to court. So I suspect there's going to be a period of lawfare taking place in the United States for the first 2 years of the Trump presidency.
In fact, immediate illegal challenges also around another decision by the president. He's also signed a whole range of immigration-focused orders, and one of them targets the issue of birthright citizenship. Essentially, it guarantees citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. It is an order that is protected by the 14th Amendment in the U.S., but really focusing and honing in on the issue of immigration. We know how important it was, even on the campaign trail and even in his first term.
No, absolutely. This is going to be the single most important policy issue for the Trump administration. Because when Trump talks of Make America Great Again, it's about strengthening the economy, getting employment numbers up, making sure that ordinary Americans don't have to do 2-3 jobs to survive, fixing the healthcare system, and whether the perception is correct or not, but there is an overwhelming perception amongst Trump supporters that illegal immigrants are the ones that are taking jobs, are the ones that are putting pressure on the health service and social services generally. And this is why Trump is so pointed in this kind of action that is going to be taken. And I dare say we are going to see mass deportations taking place over the next few months.
I want to hone in on the issue of Trump's supporters, Dr. van Heerden. The new president also essentially issuing pardons for over 1,500 of those people who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. He's granted clemency to 14 of those individuals. And those 14 individuals, according to our FSN correspondent, are among those who were most violent on the day. These are people who were trying to overturn the results of a democratic election. What kind of message does that send with a new president either pardoning or granting clemency for anyone who's willing to essentially fight for him? And I don't mean that in a sort of manner of speaking, but practically out to fight for him.
Yeah, you see it. I don't know why people are so surprised about this particular executive order, because it is the Democrats that weaponized January 6th, as you know, and tried to implicate Donald Trump as the leader of an insurrection of sorts that was supposed to happen on January 6th. And Trump has professed his innocence. In fact, the courts ruled in his favor. And for that reason, I think this was going to be an obvious decision that he was going to take, because he, from the beginning, was saying that people have the right to protest, they have a right to express themselves in terms of the First Amendment and so forth. So, you know, it comes as no surprise that he wholesale gave pardons to all 1,500 people involved. And perhaps a compromise would be around the 14, as you mentioned, that was really now taking it to the extreme in terms of assaulting people and so forth. But still, giving them clemency, reducing their sentences in some cases quite significantly. So this comes as no surprise. You know, the truth is that the Democrats tried to make a big hullabaloo about this, as if it really was a coup attempt by Trump supporters. They were putting on the butter, as they say, thick, because they wanted the court case against Trump to stick. Unfortunately, it did not. And now that he is a free man, and indeed now that he is president of the US, it was obvious that he was going to give clemency and pardon all those involved in January 6th. So it comes as no surprise.
Very US-centric approach to even his first day in office, and it doesn't come as a surprise yet again. I mean, he's said again and again on the campaign trail, you've mentioned the issue of Make America Great Again, which is his rallying cry, strengthening the economy. But his policies are very US-centric. I'm thinking of the issues of taxes on exports to the US. He wants other countries to pay the price for goods and services, and Americans to be saved from that. How far can that kind of strategy take the US? Is the US an island?
It's not an island, but it's an important island amongst the many islands in the bigger scheme of things. It's still the largest economy in the world. And I think, you know, I was listening to people, and including Caroline that was speaking earlier about, you know, all these things about withdrawing from international organizations and so on and so forth. There is another explanation that I think no one wants to necessarily comment on, Iman, and that is that what do you expect from an empire that is waning, that is beginning to lose its influence and its hegemony internationally? I think Trump, deep down, is saying that it is time for us to introspect. In many ways, you could, not as extreme, but if you like, you could compare to Mao Zedong in China, which said that we need to look inward, we need to consolidate, we need all the money we have to spend on ourselves in the country and not on international organizations and aid and so on and wars and so forth. So it is an indication that America is going through a very profound change. And Donald Trump is saying that we need to look at ourselves, at our own interest first, before we look elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think we're thinking that way on the African continent as well. You know, you mentioned the withdrawal of the US from the WHO, which perhaps is worrying given what we experienced during COVID-19 with vaccine inequality. But many countries on the African continent have reflected and said, South Africa included, that we need to have our own capabilities insofar as a pandemic response is concerned. But the US is the biggest funder to the WHO, and it must surely have a huge impact on the work of that organization.
No, absolutely. I mean, no one would want the US to now take this decision to withdraw from the WHO. But at the same time, I think there is some credence in the argument. You know, if you look at what's happening in Burkina Faso over the last 2 years since the French were chased out of the country. Very good thing, some people will argue. They're taking ownership of their own country, their own decisions. They're getting rid of colonial vestiges that has been there. And so when you do that kind of thing, and you talk of African Renaissance, then we can't also want to say we are very dependent on the United States, the European Union, and so forth for money, aid, and funding, and so on. At some point, we do need to stand on our own 2 feet and begin to look after ourselves. However, having said that, it is rather dramatic for the United States to withdraw from the WHO and indeed from the Paris Accord.
Yeah, it's going to have a wide-ranging impact around the world. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. And he is a Senior Research Fellow at the African Diplomacy and Leadership Centre at the University of Johannesburg.